Today is the 1st of September, 2015, and the topic is the 9 Republican candidates and the mass media crusade to topple the top vote-getter, Donald Trump, from his #1 position as of the Cleveland show on the 6th of August this year. And my guest is David DeWitt, reporter and editor of the Athens News and member of the Democratic Party. And I am Robert Whaley, retired historian from Ohio University, who is also an amateur Democrat. And this is Athens Speakout, number 344. And to summarize what we did in the last couple of shows, the Fox channel had a quiz show with 17 Republican candidates, first string and second string, on the 6th of August, 2015. The top 10 had poll ratings established by the average of 5 prominent national polls. And at that point, Donald Trump was somewhere around 25–30%, 30% according to his own figures, as the top pollster, top in polls. And he was appealing to the white working class, the white middle class, age group 18 to 35, who were seeing their incomes being reduced by competition from China and competition from Mexico. And the two major issues of Donald Trump was we got to stop the flow of drugs and unrecorded immigrants from Mexico on one hand, and we got to stop the investments in China, and we have to stop the multinational corporations from investing in China and restore industry to the United States. And for the old-timers, that sounds pretty good. Donald Trump has never run in a presidential campaign, but he is a very wealthy real estate broker who supported Democrats and Republicans in 50 states because as a real estate dealer, he needs to have friends in both parties on state and local government as well as national government. So when the primaries were held when the polls were held by Fox Channel, Trump was on top. And from a religious perspective, Trump gave lip service to Billy Graham's evangelical religion, appealing to the older group, who was the #1 preacher in the United States from 1945 to 1960. His son, Franklin Graham, is still preaching, but he is less well known to rural America. The Democratic pundits were mostly sneering at Trump. And he then was being attacked by Fox Channel newscasts and 9 Republican competitors. And they all claimed to be some kind of a Christian. And Trump claimed to be a Presbyterian, but that's a kind of a dubious religion because he has divorced 3 wives. So if he is a Presbyterian, he's not a good one. Now, as a historian, I ranked Ben Carson, medical doctor, brain surgeon from Johns Hopkins, as the best of the Republican candidates. And And his father was a Seventh-day Adventist minister, and he had some religious credentials himself. In the past, Trump had given money to Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Hillary Clinton, and some Republicans didn't think he was a very loyal Republican and wanted Trump to pledge that he would support all of the other Republicans if they got the nomination. And Trump said, well, I'm out for myself, and I'll make that decision if and when I get defeated. So Trump then was campaigning for himself, and he was number one in that Cleveland panel show. Now, I hope that if the Democratic Party wins the nomination, that President-elect Clinton or Bernie Sanders, who's a long shot, and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders, might select Ben Carson as the Surgeon General or the Secretary of Health, and he would be an ideal candidate for healing the deep black-white split of the American population. So I rate Ben Carson as the best of the Republican candidates. I did then, and I still do, I still rate Ron Paul as number two because he has a clear stand on the Bill of Rights and the War Power Acts and knows more about the Constitution than the other Democrats. And I would support John Kasich as number three because his story is one of economic success. He started out in the working class, moved to the middle class, and eventually into the corporate class. And that is the old-fashioned 19th century middle class kind of capitalism. Kasich is better than Scott Walker, who has the same kind of a background, but Kasich has made some concessions to Obamacare, and he's not yet tried to bust the unions as Scott Walker has. Now, I have in my hand the latest report from USA Today, which claims that Trump is down to 23%, and Ben Carson is also 23%. I don't know if I believe those polls. And Carly Fiona is 10%, she's third, and Ted Cruz is 9%, Scott Walker is 7%, and Jeb Bush is 5%. Do you believe that poll? Or is that CIA tipping up?
Monmouth?
This is today's USA Today.
Oh, these are Iowa voters, so these are Iowa caucus goers.
Yeah, right. That's a good qualification.
405 of them.
Yeah.
Done by Monmouth. Monmouth's not an unreliable.
Yeah, but 405 is a very small sample.
It is a small sample.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a margin of error of 5% here.
Yeah. Wow.
So, in the Iowa caucuses, I'm surprised how far Scott Walker has fallen. That's what surprises me most, because he was leading the Iowa caucus polls for months. So it's a little bit shocking to see him down to 7% with
well, maybe the
four
Kasich is better.
in front of him. Well, Kasich's not even on there.
Oh, he's not?
No.
I guess it's down in fine print.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of low there.
So,
Now,
4%
yeah,
Kasich.
there's another poll today from the Hill magazine. That's called the Capitol Hill magazine.
I know the Hill.
And they say that Kasich is in the top 3. Today's poll.
Is that a national poll or is
No,
that,
this is Hill. This
yeah,
is whole polls.
But it's not New Hampshire or Iowa.
Well, you don't know. You don't know how they got the statistics.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the problem. All of these pollsters are playing games with the statistics.
Right.
And well, I saw MSNBC Rachel Maddow yesterday. Did you see that?
I didn't watch her show yesterday, no.
Well, she has a different kind of a poll. She says Trump is number one at 29%. Second place is Ben Carson with 15%. And Jeb Bush is 9%, third. And Carlina Ferroni is number 4 at 8%. And all of the others are down to 1-2%. She thinks they're tanking. Which of those polls do you have faith in?
Robert, perhaps you should explain to the audience about, you and I had a conversation on Monday about Gallup and the poll taking and all of that.
Right.
I don't think a lot of people understand, how polls are taken and, how to read them or,
Well, Gallup was the first in the business. And he became number one in the country in 1936 when he correctly predicted that Franklin Roosevelt would win. Now, the Republicans all followed a magazine called Literary Digest, which said that Landon would win. Well, Franklin Roosevelt took 46 states and lost 2, Maine and Vermont. And the Literary Digest had egg on its face and went out of business. And the reason why Gallup was the number one pollster from 1936 to 1948, and even beyond it, into the 50s and 60s, is that he developed an accurate sample. He said, let's take the population of the United States. We got 12% blacks, we got 25% Catholics, we have 3% Episcopalians, we got Northerners, Southerners, we got Italian Americans, Irish Americans, and put these all in a computer. They didn't have computers, but put them in a telephone bank, okay? And then you go to the major cities, go to Columbus and Cleveland, and he hires telephone workers to make samples of how the voters are going to go in November. Well, what made Literary Digest so stupid is that they were rich and they didn't bother to go around door to door and interview people. And Literary Digest only took people who were rich enough to afford a telephone in 1936. So they didn't bother to count the blacks who lived in shacks. But a Gallup pollsters went around to South Carolina and picked up black potential voters and put them in the mix. So he then had a big staff to get more or less accurate polling by door-to-door sampling. Now, when I came to Ohio in 1964, I understood that Gallup had a worker in Zanesville who interviewed all of the people in Southeast Ohio according to the Southeast Ohio profile. And they had Methodists and Catholics and a few blacks and so forth. That was all in the sample. So Gallup was pretty reliable in 1964. Now, Gallup made one big mistake in 1948 with the Truman election. Gallup is a Episcopalian, he's a Republican, and it said that Dewey is ahead by 20 points. Truman will never catch up. So the polls were getting closer and closer in October, and he was saying that Dewey will win by 3%, but it's going to be a pretty close election. But then he got lazy, and he stopped polling on Friday evening and went to bed. Well, come Tuesday morning, Harry Truman comes out with a big headline from the Chicago Daily News, a great Republican paper, Dewey wins. And Truman has a big smile because Truman won by something like 10,000 votes throughout the nation in a very close election. Well, Gallup said, what happened? Why did I go wrong? Well, what went wrong was that Truman went on a railroad train from New York to San Francisco, had the whistle stop, and stopped in every small town in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Colorado, all the way there, and gave a 30-minute speech. And all of these farmers who listened to Truman personally said, God, you know, the New Deal is right. They did give us subsidies. So they changed their mind over the weekend. Come Tuesday morning, they said, well, damn it, I'm going to go with New Deal and the Truman because I made money at it. That's what happened in 1948. So now, Gallup, ever since then, carries out polling on Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday, to see how many people might change the very last minute. Well, now Gallup has competition, because along comes the New York Times, the CBS, NBC, all kinds of pollsters come out, and they start tilting the poll according to their own constituency. And that's what we just see today. USA and Hill and Rachel Maddow are playing a game, and nobody knows what they'll really be like when the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary is really called. And those polls are subject to fluctuation. Okay, is that enough?
What about, we talked about Zogby.
Yeah, Zogby.
You want to explain that?
Yeah, okay. Well, we all know that the Jewish lobby has tremendous influence in the American media because the top journalists study for literature and a PhD, and there are 10 Jewish senators. And CBS, they all have a lot of Jews on their staff. And we know that the Democratic Party has a very important constituency among Jewish Americans. And Truman was pro-Jewish. Johnson was pro-Jewish. And the Jewish constituency is very important in the polling business. And Jews will deny it, but they have a tremendous influence. Well, Barack Obama got the Jewish vote, but it was only for the presidential election. And then he fell down in 2010 and 2014 and didn't bother campaigning for the Senate and the House of Representatives. So the Republicans always made a big comeback in the congressional elections. And Obama was just out for his own ego, and he won in 2008 and in 2014 based on his personality, and the Jews preferred Barack Obama to John McCain, who was a pilot and a war hero, and Mitt Romney, who is a Mormon, so they had religious baggage. That's what happened in the recent polls on that. I don't know, does that cover that, Steve?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, you have any questions or comments on this?
No, I can point people to a resource if you want to see an aggregation of all the polls that are going on. RealClearPolitics.com has every poll listed, and it has the averages of every poll that gets taken place. So it's an interesting resource to watch the polling and see how it's and track how it's gone throughout the past months and all the coming months as well.
Yeah. Okay. But you don't follow polls very closely.
I look at Real Clear Politics, and I see what the poll averages are doing and how people
now,
are
what
moving
about
up
what
and
about?
down. I don't put a lot of stock into any one single poll.
What about the the Pew Trust? They seem to be the polling that PBS seems to have confidence in.
Yeah, the Pew Research Center is, I'd say they're fairly even-handed and data-driven, not ideologically driven.
Yeah. Now, what makes it so different from the Gallup days in 1948 is that they have all kinds of subsidiary questions. What is your stand on Israel? What is your stand on the CIA? They got other kinds of questions which divide the electorate into all kinds of factions. You know, what do you think about climate change and so forth and so on? So these presidential candidates may be up in one poll and then they lose on the religious issue, you see.
Right. And there's a lot of questions sometimes about, you have to take, if you look at any poll, you can't read too much into it by the lead in a newspaper story. You really have to look at the poll.
And you have to go to the state.
What type of questions were asked, how the questions were asked.
And go to Des Moines and see what the Iowa voters really think.
Right.
Because national TV does not do well with state newspapers.
No, as far as
Kasich has an inside track on the Ohio press.
Right. There's no doubt
and
about
Cruz
that.
has the Texas press. So he's going to go. Now, I don't know what's happening in Florida. Well, anyway, I want to say something more about Rachel Maddow's polling. She did some test questions. And the purpose of these questions was to prove how dumb the Republican electorate is. So she asks 3 questions. Well, she asked 2 questions. Just Republicans now. Is Obama a Christian? Yes. Or is he a Muslim? Yes or no. And thirdly, are you not sure? And if not, vote not sure. So you had 3 choices. Okay. And the results were, among Republicans only, 14% of the Republicans say Obama is not a Christian, and they think he's a Muslim. 54% think he's a Muslim, and 14% think he's a Christian. And 32% are not sure. And Rachel Maddow, who's a lapsed Catholic, ridicules this as false. We all know, says Rachel Maddow, that Obama is indeed a Christian. Well, I have some doubts about Rachel Maddow's confidence in that. Because if I were to answer that poll, I would have said, I'm not sure. Because I didn't know where Obama stands on Christianity until he went recently to the African Methodist Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and sang Amazing Grace, and gave a eulogy to the martyrs in that assassination. Well, I could say, yes, I guess Obama is indeed a Christian.
So you wouldn't say not sure. You would say he is a Christian.
He is a Christian. I would go with that. But I had some doubts before that. Did you have any doubts before that?
No.
Okay.
I was going to say, what denomination was that church in Chicago, the Jeremiah Wright?
Yeah, that was
It was a Christian Baptist.
Was it?
No, it wasn't Baptist.
It wasn't Baptist?
It's United Church of Christ.
Oh, okay.
The United Church of Christ is the most liberal of the Protestant sects. It's the original Pilgrim Church, which was called Congregationalist. But they changed their name to the United Church of Christ because it's the first Christian church, the disciples of Christ, and there must be a dozen so-called Christian churches, which is another confusing thing. Okay.
And I think he claimed he went there for 20 years.
He did, but he put blackness over Christianity. And Fox Channel did a job on him. They discovered, well, he really didn't know too much about Christianity, but he knew a lot about blacks. It was a 100% black congregation. So I would say, yeah, he is somewhat dubious. If you put black over Christianity, what kind of a Christian are you? Kind of dubious. That's what I would like to say about this. In other words, all of these politicians are somewhat hypocritical. They join up the church of their mother, whether it's Methodist or Catholic or Presbyterian. And then when they get on the job, they appeal to all religions, and they want to get the votes from everybody. And you can't be everybody, men from all seasons. You're just not believable. Well, I think that, yeah, Obama is some kind of a Christian, but he does have some Muslim baggage. His mother had some kind of a curious affair with the Ugandan black who went back to Uganda. So you can't call his mother a very good Christian. Obama himself says his mother is a romantic. And then she goes off to Indonesia, gets married again to a Muslim. And his name was Barack Hussein Obama. So Fox Channel then said, yes, they made a lot of points among Republicans. His religious understanding is a little bit dubious. And I would go along with that until recently, but I think Obama is more Christian than Muslim. That's clear now. But it wasn't so clear in 2004, 2008, 2006, as he was campaigning. But you were always clear, so you know.
I take him at his word.
You took him at his word. Well, I had some doubt about Eric Holder.
About his religion?
No, about his corporate power.
Oh.
I don't take Obama or Eric Holder in the difference between religion and money. Now, according to the Christian religion, wealth is suspect. You're supposed to be giving to the poor. You're supposed to be giving to the sick. And that's
according to Jesus' teachings.
According to his teaching.
Now, I don't know if we can say that all Christians behave in that.
No, I've just said that
Right.
most Christians stop thinking, regardless of what their mother's religion was, at the age of 18. Now, if you're a philosopher or a historian, and you have to teach Western Civ, and you take a little philosophy, you begin to grow, and you begin to see that your class is filled up with different kinds of Christians. Mm-hmm. So you become more tolerant as you get a PhD and a Doctor of Divinity. And I'm a great admirer of Martin Luther King and a great admirer of Cornel West. But I don't think Barack Obama is close to either Martin Luther King or Cornel West in his theological understanding. Now,
Obama does not strike me as a particularly religious person.
Yeah, whatever that might mean.
Right.
Some people think religion is going to church. Some people think religion is metaphysical. What do you think about the universe? Mm-hmm. But I put ethics, the ethics of Jesus, the morality of Jesus, and morality of ethics and Paul, of Jesus and Paul, as the standards.
For being a Christian.
For being a liberal Christian or a Christian socialist.
Okay.
And one who understands.
So do you believe that being a Christian has to necessarily entail believing Jesus of Nazareth to be the son of Yahweh, Jehovah?
Okay. The Roman Catholic Church says we have an article of faith. And they would say that. Mm-hmm. And the fundamentalist Baptist Church of the South would say that. But I say, as a teacher of history, that anybody... I said to
anybody who follows the ethical code.
If someone asked me in class, he raises his hand, what is the definition of Christianity? I said, that's very simple. It's a follower of Jesus Christ. Now, how you follow him, that's a debatable question.
So there's some leniency in the dogma.
I am not a dogmatic. I don't believe in the Nicene Creed as the final word.
Okay.
I don't
Fair
believe
enough.
in the Apostles' Creed as the final word.
Yeah.
I'm not Greek Orthodox. I'm not Roman Catholic. And my mother was a fundamentalist Methodist.
Okay.
But I left the Methodist Church when I went away to college.
What about your father?
My father was a closet Unitarian.
Okay.
He never went to church.
Yeah.
But he didn't know enough about the Unitarians to know what a Unitarian was. So he's.
But that's what he was in effect.
As I learned more about Unitarianism
Yeah.
he went to the 8th grade and he went to a Methodist church and he thought it was the greatest experience in the 8th grade. But then he went to work for a living and he got married in a church with my mother. Then he had a fight with the minister and didn't go back. So that when I was a kid, my mother took me to Sunday school and my father never went to church. And then I said to my mother, well, why does my father go to church? Well, she said, you have to ask him. And my mother and father had an agreement. Well, I think fundamentalism is okay. It keeps you out of crime. But I myself don't need it. That's what my father said.
Uh-huh.
And then after I went away to college, my father took out a book called The Story of Religion, written by a guy by the name of Charles Potter, who was a Unitarian minister. And he's got a chapter on Confucius, a chapter on Martin Luther, a chapter on St. Patrick, got a chapter on Calvin, and he's got mostly Christian religions.
Mm-hmm.
But
you said Confucius too.
He has a chapter on Confucius. He has a
Was
chapter.
Siddhartha included?
He has Buddha, Confucius, and
So he's got
Mohammed. He's got one chapter on those 3 religions.
Yeah.
Let's take a station break.
Yeah. Now he's got Jews, in which he has a chapter on Jeremiah. He has a chapter on Isaiah, and of course he has a chapter on Moses. So he's got a lot of Jewish prophets. So that,
Sure.
and of course Moses is the hero of both the Christians and the Jews.
Yes.
So that's not a problem. But it's mostly, it was published in 1927, I think. And it's 90% Christian based. He's got a chapter on the Orthodox. Yeah, he's got some, and he's got a big chapter on St. Patrick because of the people who would buy his book. A lot of Irish bought his book. Yeah. He's got a chapter on St. Thomas Aquinas. He has a chapter on, he's got St. Augustine. St. Augustine is big.
Yeah.
St. Augustine is big for both Catholics and Protestants.
Sure.
St. Thomas Aquinas is officially the theology of Pope Pius XII.
Yeah.
Now, John the 23rd has departed from that. And Francis seems to be departing even more so.
Right.
So the Catholic Church is becoming more scientific, more liberal, and more socialistic as time goes on.
Yeah.
Now, I voted for John Kennedy. No problem. John Kennedy.
Do you think that John Kennedy was a particularly religious person?
Well, he said he read the Bible once a day as a matter of.
I know he didn't particularly enjoy going to mass.
No, he read the Bible once a day as a form of relaxation, and his mother, Rose Kennedy, was very devout.
Yeah.
So he didn't repudiate his mother, but his father was somewhat of a philanthropist, and so was John.
As was he, I was going to say.
So the strict Catholics, well, fortunately for John Kennedy, Pope Pius the 12th died in 1958, and Pope John the 23rd opened up the door, and John Kennedy built on John the 23rd's liberal version of Catholicism. Yeah, so, okay, all religions are in flux.
Certainly.
Yeah, okay, well, I guess we have enough on Rachel Maddow and her poll. It's I guess we can go forward a bit. Although she had a second question, which is a little more objective in a way. What did she have? Yeah, her second test question was, Barack Obama born in the United States? The Republicans say 29% of the Republicans said yes, he was born in the United States. 54% said no. And 29%,
including Donald Trump,
and 29% said they're not sure. Well, there's something a little bit phony about his birth certificate, although I think he was born in Hawaii. But what's phony about it, and what's missing, is the date of the birth. Mm-hmm. He was born out of wedlock, wasn't he? That's more controversial than the than Honolulu.
I guess, if you say so.
Yeah, they didn't get the photostat of the certificate, so I would like to know what the date of the thing. So, but I would go along with, yeah, he was born in Hawaiian Islands. That's clear. And Hawaiian Islands is part of the United States. It's no longer a territory.
Right.
But the other thing about the Hawaiian Islands is it's the only state in the Union which a majority is not at least nominal Christian. In other words, the Chinese and Japanese and the native Hawaiians, the Asian religions outrank all other denominations in the Hawaiian Islands.
That would seem to make sense.
Yeah. So it's the most liberal state in the United States as far as religious diversity is concerned.
Diverse. Sure.
So Southern Baptists can say, yeah, there's something suspicious about Hawaii. And they have certain grounds. Okay. Okay, well, let's go on to another question. Let's get at what is Trump's saying about the Chinese economy and why it's expanding and why it's industrializing and why is he getting support on the Chinese issue?
Well, what he's saying is that they're winning and we're losing.
Yeah.
And that they're gaming us and that they're taking over and all that stuff.
Right.
I don't know. I don't believe that the Chinese currency value crashing and the trouble in the global markets has changed his position at all on that. I think he's still continuing forward with what he's been saying.
It's volatile.
Yeah.
And the price of oil is going up now. I don't know what that means.
Right. I don't think he cares. I don't think it's going to change anything that he has to say. I don't think it's going to alter his narrative, but there it is.
Well, I guess the price of oil is helping Cruz. I think he's coming up in the polls.
He is coming up in the polls. I'm not sure what I attribute that to.
Well, if the price of oil is going up, they're making money on stocks.
Although I have to commend Scott Walker now. He's decided to go toe-to-toe with Trump on the Mexican border wall,
right,
and propose a wall for the 5,000-mile border with
Okay. Well, I would like to turn our attention now to a rather important article in the Athens Messenger in which we have some statistics. It's called "The Flamboyant Trump Evolved into a Cautious Businessman." And they have a picture of Trump. And they got charts here with the growth of the wealth of the 4 top men in the United States. And they are Bill Gates, Microsoft founder, Warren Buffett, investor in railroads and real estate and Kraft cheese and Heinz ketchup. And the third richest man is an unknown. His name is, he's not running for office. His name is Donald Breen, and he's a big real estate dealer. And fourth is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Okay, and this shows, this chart shows the growth in their profits since 1988. And they were way down, and they had, well, let's go at it one at a time. These graphs, these circle graphs, show the percentage of growth in stocks and bonds of these 4 billionaires, okay, since 1988. So Bill Gates, in 1988, his portfolio has grown 7,173%. So he's number one on that circle graph. That shows you how much wealth he's got. And Bill Gates made his profits, of course, on Microsoft, and he's making his profits from the advertising business, which is bad for newspapers. And Life magazine and New York Times are in trouble. Time magazine is in trouble. And the profits of Bill Gates are astronomical. The second circle is Warren Buffett, who I've just said is the heir of a railroad dynasty, Crafts, and so forth and so on. And his percentage growth from 1988 to the present is 2,612% since 1988. And the third circle is this real estate dealer, Donald Breen, only 722%. So his circle's a little smaller. And then there's a dotted circle, which shows you the Standard & Poor's average growth of stocks compared to the fourth circle of Barack Obama, the weakest of the candidates. And the average growth of the average stock portfolio, 2% for AT&T, 5% for BP, they've only gone up 300% in that small dotted graph there. And then inside that is the small Donald Trump's, his stocks went up only from 1 billion to 4 billion. Not very large on that orange circular graph. Then we have a bar graph, which shows you the money. And the bar graph gives you it in dollars figures. So Bill Gates had $1 billion in 1988. Now he has $80 billion in cash profits. And Warren Buffett had $2.5 billion in '88. Now he has $67 billion income and wealth. And Donald Breen had $1.9 billion in 1988. Now he has $5.2 billion. And poor old Donald Trump only started out with $1 billion and is now up to $4 billion. So the average reader here, the poor men of Athens County, may think that, oh, Donald Trump isn't so wealthy after all. Who are you comparing him with? So it's a very deceiving and yet revealing poll.
Yeah.
If you handle statistics. Unfortunately, most voters do not read statistics very carefully. Okay. Okay, I have another little sheet of paper on the polling. I call it plutocracy. This came from Nation magazine, a left-wing magazine, called The Immortal Fortunes. And it talks about the estate tax and the creation of trusts. And back before the 1980s, the trusts used to have a 100-year time limit on them. So you could set up a trust a rich man could set up a trust, putting the money in the Ford Foundation or something, not give it out to his heirs, but it ends after 100 years. But now they have 28 states who have passed new laws to set up an immortal perpetual trust that it can never be broken. So once you put the money in, it'll stay in that family forever. But of course, that's what the rich want is to put their money in Cayman Islands. It can be taken out of the American, and that's one of the issues that both Sanders and Trump are on the same page. Our money at least comes back to the United States in real estate, and it's not parked abroad.
Yeah, there are a lot of corporations that hold their money in offshore accounts to avoid paying taxes
so
in the
Trump
United
is still
States.
in the race.
Also, interestingly, because you're talking about trust funds, more and more the wealthy in this country are made up of people who have inherited their wealth as opposed to have made it themselves.
That's true.
That percentage is
And that's
higher than
that's
it's ever
Jeb
been.
Bush. Jeb
Bush would be a perfect example of that.
And that's why I would vote for Trump over Bush, Jeb. But what does he want to be? Bush the Third? Does he want to be a king? Does he want a title of nobility? Is his
They're certainly
wealth-
dynastic.
So oligarchy tends to be plutocracy, and plutocracy could become a permanent monarchy. Watch out for your hat.
The studies are showing that we already are basically an oligarchy
Yeah, right.
because of just the responsiveness.
But we
of
don't want to say it too
politicians.
loudly because then that gets voters to be cynical.
Well, for
give
100
up. Why
years-
bother to vote?
We have, which is a terrible concept in and of itself.
Right.
Because if all the people who threw away their votes by not voting actually participated,
That's
they
right.
could make a very significant impact.
Right.
But no, I mean, it's oligarchy is becoming, the fact of American oligarchy is now joining the ranks of the fact of American empire is one of those truths of our nation that we refuse to talk about, and it's gauche, and
Right.
and you can't talk about it in public, even though it's the truth.
Well, Obama is, not Obama, but Sanders is bringing out socialism. He say, yes, I am a socialist.
Yeah.
Now it's up to the voters to find out what does socialism really mean.
Yeah, especially through all the rhetoric and the propaganda about it.
So the New Deal was about 1/4 socialist.
Mm-hmm.
TVA, the National Labor Relations Board, Social Security were socialistic features,
Absolutely.
and they imitated the British Labour Party.
Yeah.
We have a question here.
Yeah, I don't know what Bernie Sanders, how he would define being a socialist, but could you give us your definition, your textbook definition of?
Okay, well, I read a biography of Karl Marx written by Isaiah Berlin, who was one of the top political theorists of the 20th century. And I also studied under G.D.H. Cole, who was a Fabian socialist in England. And socialism was a kind of a mild socialism in England. It was called the Labour Party. So the Labour Party was an informed, was a quasi-liberal party, quasi-socialist. And they argued that if you got old age pensions and Social Security checks and Medicare,
Yeah.
you're moving toward socialism gradually. Now, the Labour Party peaked from 1945 to 1951 under Clement Attlee. So the British opposition party were called Liberals up to 1906, and in 1906 they had a Lib-Lab coalition in which the Labour Party got 46 votes. And in 1924, they finally elected the first socialist prime minister, Ramsay MacDonald. But he was a very mild reformer. And then he got caught in the devaluation of the pound in 1931, and the Tories came back. And then we had to wait until World War II, 1945, in which the people finally voted Clement Attlee, a first clear socialist government. But then the problem with socialism is that who pays?
Yeah.
And they always run up to the balancing the budget.
How would
That's the weakness of socialism. Who guides the socialist bureaucrat?
how would John Maynard Keynes
Well, he's a kind of a step toward socialism.
and did you say you had some influence from John Stuart Mill?
Yeah, well, let's talk about John Maynard Keynes.
Okay.
Because John Stuart Mill lived in 1859 and died in 1870. But let's talk about John Maynard Keynes. He looked at Marxism and said, well, you got to at least socialize the banks because the banks have finance capital. So he said you have supply and demand, which is the free market, but sometimes demand, supply break down. And that's what happened in 1929. The demand was there. In other words, the working class wanted more automobiles, but they didn't have any wages. They didn't have any purchasing power. Right. So you got to put a floor underneath the working class. You got to give the poor Social Security. You got to give the working class subsidized wages, minimum wage. Well, if they get a living wage, then they can buy more automobiles. But if you're going to just squeeze the turnip, and you have 5 million people employed in the automobile business in 1929, and it's down to 2 million in 1933, you're never going to get out of the Depression unless you prime the pump and put a floor under the lower class and put a ceiling on top of a tax.
So that's what FDR did.
That's what FDR did. He taxed the bankers, and the bankers hated Franklin Roosevelt because what he did was to cut the interest rates. He said, well, you used to get 6%. Well, you're only going to get 1.5% now. Take it or leave it. That's the problem. How do you manipulate the interest rates? Well, that's kind of a socialism of the banks. Is that enough on Keynes?
Yeah.
Or you want to go back to John Stuart Mill?
Yeah, you told me he was a big influence.
Yeah, well, he wrote a book called On Liberty. And he said, how do you define liberty? What is the difference between, Jefferson and Franklin, who used to know that security and liberty are in conflict. And Franklin made the very first statement about that, in which he said, if you have a conflict between liberty and security, you got to go with liberty first because you'll lose the security in the long run if you don't have liberty. So the liberal Bill of Rights, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, is already a step toward Jeffersonian's liberal democracy. Well, John Stuart Mill does this for the British. And he says, what is liberty? I have the liberty to do anything I want, and to make it very simple, I have the liberty to swing my fist until it meets the neighbor. And I don't have the liberty to smash him in the jaw. So there you have to have a criminal proceedings to balance the rights between the defendant and the plaintiff. So the Republicans say liberty for private enterprise, liberty for the businessman to make as many profits as he wants. Yeah, but what is the limitation of that?
Well, what we've ended up with is socialism for the rich and free enterprise for the poor.
Yeah. Okay. So you can't have only liberty, you got to have equality and liberty. And of course, Jean-Jacques Rousseau said that. Back in the French Revolution said that. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. They had 3 slogans. And the Americans are good at liberty, sometimes equality, somewhat less influence, and very weak on fraternity. Very weak on corporate collectivity. And the Catholic Church does better than that than the Protestant Church. Mm-hmm. The Protestants have got too much individuality. That's the weakness of Protestantism. Okay, well, I guess we're coming near the end, aren't we? How many minutes we got?
So.
We got 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Okay, well, you want to summarize what we did?
Well, we talked a lot about the religions with regard to President
candidates
Obama and
the candidates.
And we talked about Donald Trump and how he made
How he's making
money.
progress on 2 issues,
right.
Mexico and China, which are not yet resolved.
Right. And the nature of socialism and
Liberalism.
and liberalism and yeah.
Right. So anyway, I want to thank you for coming, and I guess we've finally ended this topic. And
so.
we'll go on to some other topic 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me,
What we
Professor.
have to keep debate going, because debate is the oxygen of democracy, and that's why I like Bernie Sanders, because he's bringing back a debate about socialism and the New Deal, and Donald Trump is doing a little bit of that for the Republicans.
It's certainly some form of populism.
Yeah, right.